Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is going to be my first video in a series of collab videos with Nullity and StacheOG. We're going to create a tutorial series called Making a Game in VR. If you'd like a quick rundown on how the series is going to work, check out Nullity's Making a Game in VR Part 00 video. Basically, I'll be handling a good amount of the 3D modeling in the series, Stache will handle texturing, and Nullity will be doing a majority of the programming. With that in mind, this will be the third overall video in the series. Today we're going to model and rig some hands for VR. Without further ado, let's jump into it. Alright, so we're going to be using Blender 2.8 for this tutorial. It's a new Blender release. Overall, I think it's pretty cool, so that's why we're using it. They did a major visual overhaul, and they kind of changed the locations of a lot of things. But hopefully it works out, so let's get into it. Of course, we start out with the basic scene here, with our cube, our light, our camera. I'm just going to get rid of all this. Delete, delete, delete. Then we're going to go ahead and get our reference image set up. So to do that, we're going to hit Shift A. Then we're going to go down here to Image, go to Reference. And then I found a reference image online. You can go find whatever hand image you want as long as it's like a top-down view or bottom-up view, I guess. Depends on how you look at it. So here is the one that I found that I liked. You can find whatever hand you want. Male, female, even like a, I don't know, fantasy demon hand or whatever, if that's your thing. But you can see that when it imported, it wasn't flat, right? So we're going to fix that by going over here. Let's bring this guy out, fix that rotation, put 0, 0, 0. Now we got it flat on the Y and X axis. So I think I also want to turn down the opacity of it, which I think would be over here somewhere. Let's see here. Transparency, there we go, use alpha. So it's this little tick box here. Just bring it down. That looks pretty good. Let's go with 0.15. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now we're going to start out by using a box. Yeah, let's start out with a box. So Shift A, Mesh, Cube. So what I'm going to do here is, you know what? I'm going to delete all the, or majority of the sides on this. So we're going to go ahead, hold down Alt, select this edge to get the selection all the way around the box for these faces. Let's delete those faces and let's delete this one. I suppose we could have started with the plane, but oh well. Now we're going to go ahead and add some loop cuts, which is this guy over here. Loop cut there, loop cut there. And fingers, whoops. There we go, back to edit mode. Tab, by the way, to go in and out of object in edit mode. So generally fingers are round, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna select everything, then we're gonna hit Shift Alt S. That's going to give us our two sphere tool. And as I move out like this, you can see it's going to round those vertices right there, those vertexes. Now we're just going to scale it down to be about the same size as this finger on this image. Scale it a bit more. And let's hit G to get our move tool and move it along the x-axis only by hitting X. Let's line it up to that finger. I'm going to hit 7 and 5 to put me in an orthographic view like this. Scale it a bit more. Alright, that looks like it's about the right size. But it does look like this finger is kind of curved a little, so we might want to move it a little bit on the x-axis to the right, like that. Now we're going to move it back on the y-axis to be at the base of the finger, right about here. Okay. And now we're going to extrude along the y-axis. So we're going to hit our E button. Then we're going to hit Y to extrude along the y-axis to about, I'd say about right here. That's about the center of the knuckle, on this hand at least. You know what? Let's change to wireframe mode. So to do that, we're going to hit Z. We're going to hold down Z, rather, and it's going to bring up this little menu. We're going to click on our wireframe right here. Actually, you don't even need to click. You just hover over it, then let go of Z. And let's move this back a bit. Back about here, about the beginning of the knuckle. Then I'm going to extrude one more time to the center of the knuckle. Then I'm going to extrude again along the y-axis to the end of the knuckle. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to select this edge right here with Alt. This whole edge. All right. Now I'm going to scale it up just a tad. There we go. Just like that. And then let's move it a little bit on the z-axis up like this so that it's pretty much flat down here, but it has that slight bump at the top for the knuckle and around the edges too, of course. Now let's go back into our top-down view by hitting 7. Then we're going to select all those edges like we had before. You know what, let's select the faces, not the edges. We're going to go into face select mode, which is this little thing up here. Select that one, that one, that one, and that one. Back into top down. Now let's go up to the next knuckle. Extrude it along the y-axis. That's about the start of the knuckle. And you know what? I think I want to scale this down just a tad because the fingers they get slightly skinnier as you go up towards the end of them. Not a whole bunch. It's not super noticeable, but they do. Then we're going to extrude one more time on the y-axis, about the center of the knuckle, then extrude again for the end of the knuckle. Right, now we're going to repeat what we did with the first knuckle. Select all those edges and scale them up slightly. Looks about good. Now let's move it up on the z-axis so it's about flat. Maybe a bit more. There we go. That looks better. Now let's go back and select these faces again. All right. Top down. Extrude one more time to the end of the finger. All right. Let's switch back into our solid mode here. So you can see what we have. We have this basic shape for the finger, right? You know what? Let me select this image here and turn it off in perspective mode. Let's see how we change that. Don't quite remember how. Okay, so to turn this off in perspective mode, this background image here, what we're going to do is we're going to select it. Then we're going to go over here. We're going to uncheck the display perspective. All right, so now we can't see that image in perspective mode. That way we can just kind of see our model here, our mesh. But if we hit 7, we go back to height, we can see that we still have this here to kind of trace with our 3D model, with our mesh. All right, so now we've got this finger, right? Let's select it. We're going to go ahead and we're going to add a modifier right here with this little blue wrench. Add modifier under the generate tab. We're going to go ahead and select subdivision surface. All right, and that kind of smooths out that finger a little bit, so it's not so square. Okay, now, right now you can see all the hard edges and the flat surfaces. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the shading to smooth. To do that, we right click, then we hit shade smooth. Now we've got a smooth looking finger. All right, and this finger we need to refine this shape to look exactly how we want it, because we're going to duplicate this finger for each one of these fingers here. So this finger here has to be looking pretty good before we do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit 3 to go to my side view. Okay. Now I can see this right here is too round. We kind of want it to be sharper on the top and then slowly fade down. So I'm going to hit Tab to go into my edit mode. Oh, I forgot to hit this little button over here. It'll conform that square boxiness, all the lines to the smooth shaded object. Alright, so let's go ahead and select these edges here. Okay, and we can go back into our side view and bring them back a bit. Let's select our move. Well, let's just hit G. Move it back on the y-axis. There we go. And let's do the same for these bottom edges here. Hit 3, G, Y. Okay. Now we maybe move it up a little. That looks alright. I think we might want to scale the whole thing a little bit downwards on the z-axis, because fingers are a little wider sometimes. They're wider than more than round. So let's hit scale on the z-axis, bring it down just a tad. Alright, that looks pretty good. Might want to bring this forward a bit more. G, Y. Something like that, maybe. What happens if we bring it down a bit more? Like that? Yeah, that looks pretty good, I think. Alright. Now, normally at this point, I would model out the fingernail with the geometry using these faces here. However, I'm not going to do that for this one because I'm not sure if we want to use gloves or if we just want a hand without gloves. In either way, we can achieve that level of graphical fidelity with or without the fingernails. Through texturing and normal mapping. So I'm just going to leave that up to Steven in his video. So with that said, let's just duplicate this finger. Yeah, let's just duplicate this finger. Go into object mode, tab into object mode. Hit Shift D to duplicate. Then I'm going to want to move it on the x-axis, so let's hit X, move it this way. Well, actually let's just move it on all axes. It doesn't really matter since we're in ortho, so the z-axis isn't going to get messed up. And we're going to rotate it along the... Oh, you know what? I forgot to center the geometry. So, what we're going to do is we're going to have this finger selected, right-click, set origin, origin to geometry. And what that's going to do is that's going to move this origin point right here, this little dot, to the center of the finger. That way, when we rotate it, it's rotating around the center of the object. Alright? So let's move this guy about right there. It would be better to do this in wireframe mode. So I'm going to switch to wireframe, rotate it a bit more on the z-axis. Maybe scale it down just a bit. Maybe scale this one up just a bit. This one looks a little small. Like that. Oh, look. See, I didn't replace the origin on this one, so it's scaling from that center yellow dot there. So we're going to need to center that again. So right-click, set origin, origin to geometry. Now that dot's in the center. Scale it up. Alright, that looks good for the middle finger. Shift D to duplicate this again. Move it over to the pinky. All right, those positionings look pretty good. So for the thumb, we're going to duplicate this center one again. Shift D, let's move it over here. We're going to scale it on the y-axis only. So hit S, Y to bring it down, make it more of a short and fat kind of finger. You know what? That might be a little too short. So let's hit Control Z to undo. Scale on the y-axis again. And maybe scale it up on the x-axis a bit. Okay. Now let's rotate it on the z-axis. G to position it a little better. Alright, and I think that looks pretty good. Let's switch back to solid mode. Pan around a little bit. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. So normally thumbs like this are kind of rotated. So like if you hit R and then I'll hit Y to rotate it on the local axis, they rotate like this. They're like at a 45-degree angle ish. However, I'm just gonna leave it flat like that because we can handle that rotation via the rig when we go ahead and rig this hand. So we'll do that later. All right, now let's go ahead and delete these. Delete these faces here. All right, and we're going to go ahead and do that for all the fingers. You know what? Before we delete all the faces, let's select everything and join it into one object, so you don't have to keep selecting the actual object and going into edit mode. So we selected them all. Hit Control J to join. Okay. Now let's go back into edit mode. Select each of these faces here. Hit X and delete faces. All right. That looks pretty good. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to join these fingers and start modeling out the actual palm of the hand here. Okay, and to do that, we're going to go ahead and switch to our vertex select mode, which is up here on the left. We're going to select this guy, and hit Alt-M at center. And that's going to bring those two vertexes together. So now we have one vertex right here joined together. Okay, so we're going to do that for each of these. Alt-M at center. Alt-M at center. And then we're going to want to do that one more time for the vertexes underneath it. So Alt-M at center. Alt-M at center. Alt-M at center. Okay? And now we've got these fingers joined together and we can begin extruding backwards to create the palm of the hand. All right? So let's select that whole edge right there. We're going to go into our edge mode up here in the left corner again. Hit Alt. Select that whole edge loop like that. Okay? Now, if your edge loop doesn't select all the way around when you have Alt, that means one of these vertices is probably not merged correctly. Okay? That means it might be split into two verts just on top of each other, and you don't want that. So you're going to want to make sure you select both verts and hit Alt-M and merge. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to hit E to extrude, and we're going to hit Y to extrude it straight back like this. Okay? Let's go into top-down view. All right, that looks pretty good. Now, before we extrude any further, let's reduce the poly count of this a little bit. And to do that, what we're going to want to do is go ahead and switch into vertex mode. Select this guy. And then we're going to hit, oh, you know what? Before we drag that on top of the other one, we want to go over here, click on this little wrench and screwdriver, go into options, and make sure this auto merge box right here is checked. What that means is it's going to merge vertexes that are directly on top of each other, right? So normally, if this wasn't checkbox, this is what would happen. We would select this, we would hit our magnet tool, then we would hit G to move this vertex. Oh, doesn't want to snap. That's what's going on. We need to change our snapping mode up here to vertex. Right now it's on increment, so it's just going to snap at every like 1 or 2 spaces in Blender. So we're going to need to change that to vertex. Okay. Then we're going to need to hit G, and it'll snap to this vertex here. But since we don't have that little checkbox, that auto merge checkbox tick, we still have 2 verts here, right? We don't want that. We want it to merge on top of each other. So let's hit Control Z to bring that back. Tick this auto merge checkbox. Let's hit our little magnet icon. Hit G, bring it right over here, and now those 2 vertexes are merged together. All right, and do that for this one as well, just like that. We're going to do that for each of these fingers here. All right. Now let's go ahead and turn our modifier back on so we can see how that looks. Okay, that doesn't look too bad, and we would have reduced the poly count a pretty good amount. So now let's continue extruding. So we're going to take this edge select tool up here, select it all around just like we did the first time, top down, and we're actually going to want to scale this because this doesn't look quite right before we extrude. G, X, move it over a bit, scale it on the X-axis. All right, GX to move it just a tad, and I'm going to switch to wireframe because it's easier to see. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and bring these vertices up though, right about here. Let's switch back to solid mode here. Bring these vertices up to simulate the knuckles. So let me just select these, all of these, and bring them up at the same time. Hopefully it looks right if we do that. Hit G, Z, bring it up. Maybe a little more. GZ, bring it up. It might be a little too far. Oops, I have snapping turned on. Shift tab turns on and off that little magnet icon that we were talking about earlier, so it doesn't snap to the vertices. I think that looks about right for the knuckle positions, right? Yeah, that looks good. All right. So now we can finally continue extruding. So top down, Control E, whoops, not Control E, sorry, just E. Y, bring it back, and let's scale it a little bit on the Y-axis to kind of flatten out this line here. So S, Y, scale it on the Y-axis, bring it down, flatten that out a little bit. All right. GX to move it sideways, and SX to scale it on the X-axis. All right, that looks pretty good. All right. Let's see if this thumb might be a little too far back, the geometry. Let's go back into top-down mode. Yeah, it looks like it's a bit too far back. So let's select the face on this one. Let's hit G, Y. Let's not do Y actually. Let's do let's go into top down so it doesn't move it on the Z axis. Just hit G. Move it up like this. All right, that looks pretty good. Now let's go back to working on the palm here. All right, let's extrude it one more time. E, Y. Right. Oops. GX, move it on the x-axis. SY, scale it, make it flatter. And let's just hit 0 to make it completely flat. Oops. SY doesn't want to work with 0 for some reason. So let's just scale it to almost flat. G. Now, how about SX? Scale it a little. GY, bring it up a little. And modeling is a lot of tweaking like this. You'll just have to mess around with your scaling and your positioning to make things look right. Let's see here. Oh, you know what I forgot? I forgot to get rid of that knuckle. Thumbs don't have 2 knuckles, they only have 1. So let's go ahead and select this whole edge here with Alt, this whole center edge. You say Control X to dissolve those edges. What that's going to do is that's not just going to completely delete them, that's going to dissolve them so that Blender kind of calculates these faces here. We're going to do that for each one of these. Okay, that looks pretty good. That would be the start of the fingernail. I think we want to add another edge loop right about there for the thumb. All right, now let's go back to our select tool. You know what, let's hit Z and go into wireframe mode just so I can see the image underneath. Selected this whole edge loop here, this whole edge loop. Then we're going to double tap G, GG. And that's going to allow us to slide this whole edge loop along the lines that it's connected to. Just like that. All right. We're going to do the same thing for this one, GG. Select this one, GG. Select this one, and then scale it slightly. Let's get out of wireframe mode for this one. So Z, solid, and rotate a little bit. Scale it up a tad, about like that. GZ to move it along the Z-axis. Go. Get that flat along the bottom. Have a little bump on the top for the knuckle. That looks pretty good for the thumb right there. Alright. Now let's continue with the palm. At this point, we're going to merge. We're going to start merging the hand to the thumb here. So let's select this, extrude back a couple more times. Let's see, extrude once, bring it straight back on the y-axis, so that it lines up with about this line here. Okay, now let's extrude again, back on the y-axis. There we go. So that it lines up with about this one right here. All right, and let's move this guy on the x-axis a little bit because it's not lined up with the palm. Go back into wireframe so I can see. Looks about right. I think this might need to come over a little bit as well. G on the x-axis. Looks pretty good. Alright, now we need to figure out how we're going to connect this thumb with this palm here. It might be a little difficult because we merged these up here, so the topology might be a little different. But we'll figure it out. GUI, bring it back a little bit more because I want more of a straight line here. Alright, go back into solid. Now let's figure this whole thing out. Go ahead and select all this, extrude one more time, straight back. So EY, bring that back. Let's go into top down to make sure we're lined up with the palm still. GX. Right, scale it on the X a little bit. Alright, that looks pretty good. And I think we're going to want to scale this one as well. So let's go into wireframe mode again so we can see GX to move it over. Make that more of a straight line there. We're going to scale it on the X. Like so. Okay. Let's do the same for this line here, this loop. GX. Bring it up on the X a tad. Whoops, sorry. SX. There we go. That makes it more of a smooth transition there. Go back to solid mode. Now let's delete those faces. X, delete those faces. And then we're gonna go ahead and select that whole edge loop right there. Select this one as well. Let's hit Control E to bring up our edge menu. Now we're gonna go ahead and select bridge edge loops, and that should create geometry between those two edges. Boom. And now our thumb is connected to our hand. Alright, that looks pretty good. Our hand is coming together nicely. Of course, we've got these waves in the top of the hand that we're going to have to fix, but we'll do that a little later. So let's go ahead and select this edge again and continue creating the palm and the base shape of our hand. Hit 7. Oops, 7. Let's bring it back a bit more. Let's hit G, Y, GY. Bring it back. Let's bring it back as far as we can without having to create another line. Switch to wireframe mode there. Scale it on the x-axis. Down a bit. GX. That looks pretty good there. Okay, extrude it one more time. Down to the wrist. GX to center it a bit more. SX to scale it. GY, bring it up a little bit. Looks like I scaled it down a little too much, so GX to center it. And then SX to scale it again. Alright, now we should just be able to bring it back pretty far on the y-axis. So we extrude it again, bringing it back on the y-axis. GX to move it over here. I think I extended it a little too far. I don't think we want that much of the forearm in the model. So GY, bring it up a little. Is that good? I think that's good, about that size. So SX, GX. Alright, and that space gives us about enough for like a glove if we wanted to do a glove texture. That little wrist area right there. This one looks a little large. You can see here it's pretty far out from the actual image. So scale it on the x-axis in a little bit. GX, bring it over, just like that. Okay, let's fix this area because this is way off. You can see. So is this here. Alright. I think that's looking pretty good. Let's go back into our solid mode. Yeah, I think that shape is looking pretty good, that silhouette. Alright, so now let's go ahead and try to flatten out this whole waviness we got going on here. We probably should have done that before on the second extrusion up here, so we didn't have to do it now, but we didn't, so we're going to have to. So to do that, let's just go ahead and select all these lines here. And then we're going to bring them up on the z-axis once I get them all selected. Alright, so G, Z, bring them up. Let's see here. Let's turn this guy off, this subdivision surface modifier again. Hit that right there. GZ. I find that if you have a good looking just normal base mesh like this without a modifier, the modifiers only add to it. You just need to be careful with your topology count is all for video games. And rendering, I guess, if you're doing animation. So let's turn this back on, see what that looks like. Okay, that's too much. GZ, bring it back down a bit. Okay. I think I may want to select right about here. Oops. The lines behind the knuckles. GZ to bring them down a bit. That leaves a little bump for the knuckles, and it flattens the hand pretty decent amount. Alright, now let's go ahead and select the faces. Let's go ahead and select these faces here, and turn on our, deselect that one, so just these ones here. Turn on our proportional editing, which is this guy up here. Alright, now I'm going to hit G, and it brings up this little, this big circle. We can use a scroll wheel to increase or decrease that size, to increase or decrease the amount of the effect. Then we're going to hit G, Z. Ooh, second thought. I'm going to let's go back and reselect those faces. We have our proportional editing turned on. Let's hit G, Z to bring it up on the Z-axis, just a tad. Maybe give that hand a little bit more of a rounded shape on the top. Now let's go ahead and fix the bottom, because you can see the bottom has a little bit of those waves as well, just not as severe. Let's go ahead and select pretty much all the faces. Whoops. Control Shift to select in a line like that. It's a pretty useful tool. I think we need to select these as well. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now let's hit Control V to bring up our vertex menu. Let's see. Here's our smooth vertices tool right here. This is just going to smooth out those vertices so it's not as severe of an indent. Here we go, it smoothed it. It pretty much got rid of those waves. You can still see it a little bit, but it's not very noticeable. Alright, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and select these as well and do the same thing. Control V, smooth vertices. That looks pretty good. The reason we didn't use the smooth vertices on the top one is because it was so severe with those waves. I think we were going to have to push and pull those verts to keep the same shape on the hand. And the smooth vertices might screw up the transition from the fingers to the palm. You know what? Let's bring this up. think that's looking okay. I think any... Oh, you know what we forgot to do? I forgot to do? Let's bring these vertexes down. This one right here. Bring this guy down with proportional editing turned on. We're going to change the type of proportional editing by clicking this little curve next to it to sphere. It'll just change the fall off, how much it moves how much it moves the vertices around it. So we're going to select that vert there. We're going to hit G, Z, bring it down to create that little bump that's right next to that thumb. You want to bring it down even more. GZ, bring it down. Alright, that looks pretty good. And I think we're going to want to do the same thing for this little area here. Right around the little pinky. There's a little bump there as well. For that one, I think we are going to want to switch it back to the smooth right here. The smooth type. Okay, now we're going to hit GZ. Bring that guy down a bit. Maybe more. I think that looks pretty good, right? Maybe select this guy, bring it down a little bit too. Is that too much? No, that looks alright. Okay. That looks pretty good, I think. I think that might be a little too thick on this side here. Might want to bring that down a little. Turn off the proportional editing there. Thinking that looks pretty good. So now let's select that whole edge we got right there. Scale it on the y-axis. Bring it all the way down. That looks pretty good. May want to make it just a little bit more circular, so Shift Alt S. I think that looks pretty good for the wrist area. Now we're going to fill that in. So to do that, we're going to extrude once. Okay. Now, instead of moving it all around like this, we're just going to hit S to scale it. We're going to scale it down just a tad. Alright, we don't want to go all the way because then it's going to be too smooth of a transition. We just want to scale it down just a little. Then we want to extrude it one more time. So extrude, scale, bring it down. Alright, and now with this edge selected, we want to hit Alt M to merge all those vertices at the center. Alright, and now we've just closed up our hand. And this is, I believe, the finished geometry for the hand. Now we're going to unwrap it. Should be pretty simple. All we're going to do is select, well, first thing we're going to do is we're going to disable this subdivision surface right here. Okay. Then we're going to select this area here, this edge loop with Alt, and then just select one of the edges. Control E. Then we're going to hit Mark Seam down here at the bottom. Okay, that you're going to see it's going to get all red right there. That's just a mark so that when we unwrap this hand for texturing, it separates this whole bottom part here. And we're going to do the same thing for this whole line here. So I just hit Alt, I selected that whole edge loop that goes around that hand. We're going to deselect this right here because we don't want to cut this guy again. Bring it around here, bring it around here, it stops there. That's a pull. So we're going to hit Shift Alt to select that, and Shift Alt to select this finger, and Shift Alt to select this finger. Alright, and you can see that it went all the way around along this part of the hand, and we don't want that. We want to deselect this here, all the way up here. And I'm holding Shift to do this, by the way, in case you don't know. Shift. Okay, and we got it selected all the way to the end of the pinky finger. And the reason we don't want to have this selected, this area here, is because we want the hand to fold out along that edge. So we're going to hit Alt-E, mark seam. Alright, now we're going to hit A to select everything, and we're going to hit U to unwrap it. And now this hand should be unwrapped. If we go up here to our UV editing tab, boom, there's our hand. And you can see it's folded out along that seam right there. This edge loop right here, this whole edge loop is this line right in here, the hand folded out along. And here's the back of the hand, and it looks like it's a decent size. And I don't think Steven should have any problem on texture. Oh, well, he forgot to remove this right here, unmark this as a seam. So we're going to select these. We're going to hit Control E, clear seam, to get rid of that seam right there. Now we're going to hit A to select everything again, hit U, unwrap, and it looks like we're good. Yeah, this unwrap looks pretty good. Steven should have no problem texturing this. Alright, so we got our hand all all UV'd out. Now we're going to go ahead and rig it. To do that, we're going to go back into our layout tab up here. I just realized we never renamed the hand, so let's rename that to hand. Now we're going to go ahead and hit Shift A and go down to armature here. That's going to create this bone right here. Let's go over here and change it to, here it is, viewport display, and we're going to check this in front box right here. That's going to make it so that we can see this bone straight through the hand. So now we're going to rotate this bone on the x-axis, negative 90 degrees. Then we're going to go to our top-down view, hit G, and position it right here. And this is going to be the base hand bone. All right. Now we're going to go into our edit mode, hit tab. Then we're going to extrude. Well, first of all, we have to make sure we have this end selected. You could select this end, the whole bone, or this end. We're going to extrude this end right here, just like if it were a face. Then we're going to select it, and we're going to go over to this little bone icon right here. And we're going to go to Relations. Then we're going to uncheck Connected. And that's going to allow us to move the actual bone into position. Alright? So let's start with the index finger here. Move it up here. Hit G to move it right about to the first knuckle. This little bone piece right here. Now let's rotate it on the Z axis. Make sure it aligns properly. Select this guy, move it down a little bit. Okay. Now we're just gonna extrude this this bone here straight up to the next knuckle, and then extrude one more time up to the end of the finger. And it looks like it's not quite straight, so we're just gonna straighten out this this line here. Okay. Now, what we're going to do from here is we're just going to select these, and we're going to hit Shift D to duplicate them. Then we're going to move them over here for the middle finger, rotate it on the Z-axis, position it properly, scale it where it needs to be scaled, and we're just going to repeat that for all the fingers, all right? All right, for the thumb, let's do something a little different. Position the bones slightly differently. Select this guy, move it up here. Okay. This guy, move it back here. All right. And it looks like we've got the rig just about finished, at least what we need to do in edit mode. Actually, this one looks a little off to me, so let's do that one. All right, there we go. Now we've got it just about done. So we're going to go back into object mode. We're going to select the hand object. Then we're going to shift select the armature object. Then we're going to hit Control P to bring up our parent menu. And in our parent menu, we're going to select with automatic weights. Okay? And now we should have our hand set up so that it's tied to this armature. We can tell by going into weight paint mode up in this left corner here. Weight paint. And you can see we had this bone selected last, so this part of the thumb is going to be affected by this bone. Let's go back into object mode. Now let's move to our armature here. Let's go into pose mode here. And now you can see if we start rotating and moving these bones around, the hand moves with it, right? So if we hit that, if we rotate it along its local x-axis, or z-axis, sorry, it brings the thumb down, and we can do that with all the fingers. Looks pretty good. So actually, you know what? We need to export this so that Steven can edit it or can texture it in Substance Painter. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our object mode, select our hand. Actually, we don't have to have everything selected, but I'm going to select it anyways. Let's just save the project, file, export. Now you have all these different data types here. You can do an OBJ if you want to. I prefer FBX because it's just a standard file type. So FBX here, VR hand to the desktop, export, and you should be done. Go check out Steven's texturing video to figure out how you're gonna set up the texture sheet and create some awesome, nice looking, realistic hands. See ya.
So don't stop, get it, until you're cheddar-headed. Watch the way I navigate